evening. I thank you all for coming out this evening for our public presentation and general information meeting on our proposed historic district guidelines. And we've been working on this for just over a year, I think at this point, or around a year. So we're really excited to get this far in the process, and we're excited to share this with you and receive feedback and input from the community at large. So in a few minutes, I'm going to introduce our consultants, and they're going to take over and do a spiel that they have with a PowerPoint. And a couple of housekeeping items just so everybody is aware. This is a non-specific board of the county, of the town, no meeting of any particular board. Yes, we have board members in attendance just to hear, as any other citizen, just to hear what's being presented and potentially to add their comments to tonight's discussion. This is meant to be a public forum, open comments, so we really want to hear from you. We are no time limits in your comments. We just want them to be pertinent to the topics that are being discussed this evening. We'd like them to be respectful of the people in attendance and who you're trying to address your comments to, especially if you're seeking some clarification or answers. It may be one of the consultants can answer, it may be a staff member who answers, or it may be we have to tell you we don't know, we're going to write it down, and we're going to figure out what that answer is and get back to the group as a whole. The comments don't end tonight. That's the other most important thing I can share with everybody, including those who may be watching on Facebook this evening, is we are keeping this document open for just around a month. So we would like all comments to roll in, good or bad, to the community, to the office. We would like to have them in around Monday, September 26th, just so that I can collate and assemble all the comments together and then get them distributed to the boards who will be reviewing these comments, because we have scheduled a joint meeting of the Town Council, Planning Commission, and Historic District Review Board for Thursday, September 29th at 6:30 p.m. back here in this building. Again, that's a public meeting. You are open and encouraged to attend that as well. But it will be a little more structured because those are formal meetings of those respective boards. And at that meeting, they'll be taking up all the comments we receive and seeing what needs to be changed or incorporated into the document. Our consultants will also be in attendance at this meeting, so they get to hear along with the board members as to what comments came in, how we want to resolve them, and give them their next task items to go back out and make the final corrections, we hope, to this document. It will be coming back to the town sometime around the beginning of November. We should receive the final version coming back in. At that point, I will have started to publish what would be a public hearing calendar, because this document just doesn't come to us and bam, it's put into effect. It has to still go through a public hearing process through the Planning Commission and through the Town Council to be adopted as part of its ordinance structure. So this is not your last chance to see it or comment on it, but we wanted to give ample opportunity. I don't want anybody to walk away saying, if I didn't speak tonight or articulate everything this evening, that's it. You have an entire month to provide your comments to the community, to the town. And in particular, we'd like those sent, if you can, by email into the planning department. I have plenty of my cards on the back table, so you can take those. So you have the email address to send things to. You can send it either to planning@capecharles.org or specifically to me, and that's why I have my business cards in the back so you can get my particular email. Both of those email accounts come directly to me, so I will see all of them. And I just don't want them to slip through the cracks, and some get sent to various staffing people in the department or in the town hall. So if you can send everything to me, that would be great. That way I'm assuring I'm putting together a complete packet for that meeting at the end of the month. So, as I said, we'd like you to be open. If you have questions while they're doing the presentation, feel free to raise your hand and you'll get acknowledged and you can raise your question. They may tell you, oh, we're going to address that shortly in the PowerPoint, but they're going to try and respond to all the comments that come forward and questions that come forward tonight. I'm going to sort of serve as a moderator, so if you get unruly, I'm going to have to yank you off, but otherwise you should be allowed and good to do it. We would like you to come forward and speak through the microphone just so that our people listening on Facebook can hear you, because they really can't hear if you're just answering or asking from the audience at large. So we really do need you to come forward. So with that said, I think I got the housekeeping out of the way. I'm going to introduce Paige Pollard from the Commonwealth Preservation Group, who is leading the charge on this effort for the town, and she's going to introduce her team and go forward with the presentation.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight, both live and also on Facebook. We are very excited to be here, and we are very interested in hearing what you all have to say about this draft of the guidelines. I think Katie did a good job of introducing sort of the intent of this meeting and the steps moving forward. Not being sure who's participated in past meetings and not being sure of our audience, tonight I'm going to walk you through briefly what we have done to get to this point, and then we're going to go into more detail about the draft document, and then we're going to move through a calendar to show you some of those dates that Katie rattled off. I first want to introduce the folks that are here from my office who've been working on this project since the beginning. In the purple is Jess Archer. She is going to be our scribe tonight, so we have a record of any comments that we hear tonight. She is also responsible for the graphic identity and all of the graphic layout and flowcharts and images and everything you see in this document. And then to her right is Katie Paulson, who wrote the vast majority of the content in the document. And the three of us have kind of worked together on quality control and editing and making sure that we think we've covered everything we've heard thus far from the community and from the stakeholder groups. So I want to give them credit where credit is due, and also let you all know that as questions pop up, they may stand up and address them too. So I want to start with, when we first started working with you all, there was a lot of confusion about what is an overlay district versus a state and national register district, and how did this come to be as an overlay district. And so I want to just make sure that everyone who's participating tonight kind of has the same fundamental understanding. So we will talk very briefly about the historic district overlay and how it began and how long it's been in place. We're going to review the project to date, as I mentioned. Katie is going to walk you through a preview of the design guidelines, including some exercises and examples of key sections where we had, at the beginning of the project, heard a lot of comment or there was a lot of kind of need to address certain things. And then we'll go over the project schedule, and questions are welcome throughout the presentation or at the end, either way. And if you think of questions later, and Katie passes them along to us, we'll be sure that we address them. So at the beginning of this project, a little over a year ago, we were hired by the town for 4 specific reasons. They, I think, appreciated that we do a lot of stakeholder engagement when we develop design guidelines. And by stakeholder, to us, that means we talk to the staff, we talk to the board, we talk to the town council, we talk to the user group, meaning the property owners, and we try and hear from everyone, the good, the bad, and the indifferent, so that the end product reflects the needs of everyone in the community. So we planned a very robust stakeholder engagement process. We've had to learn a lot during COVID, and that probably we haven't been as visible in the community as we normally would have been, but we have gotten feedback and we have incorporated that throughout. We were asked to look at the historic district boundaries and see if there was any need to adjust those. We were asked to look at the zoning ordinance to make sure that it reflected what the community wanted, what the best practices are, and also that we were identifying any needed updates that would be triggered as a result of the new design guidelines. So that at the end of the project, if the new design guidelines were adopted, there would be the necessary revisions to the zoning ordinance as well. And then, obviously, the biggest part of the assignment was to develop updated guidelines for use by the community. I think it's important also to just make sure everyone understands The town of Cape Charles has a historic district that's listed on the state Register of Historic Places called the Virginia Landmarks Register, as well as on the National Register of Historic Places. Those designations are recognition. They don't impose any particular requirements. They have been in place since the late 1980s, and those nominations have become more detailed, the documentation is more sophisticated, and so those nominations were updated in 2018. Again, those are recognition. They are a path for use of historic tax credits, and I know some folks in the audience have used historic tax credits, but those are non-regulatory. Within the Commonwealth of Virginia, the only way to protect, through regulation, historic resources is through an overlay zoning. And so the town of Cape Charles, the town council adopted such an overlay zoning in 2001 in recognition of the historic character and the community's desire to protect that historic character and manage change. When they adopted the local historic overlay district, they also created design guidelines at that time, and they established the Historic District Review Board. So that action was done by town council in response to a desire within the community to protect the historic character of the community. And it's the only way that can be done in Virginia. That's important to remember. In 2019, there was an update effort to the comprehensive plan that included some assessment of the citizens' view of the community, and historic character was definitely identified as a key component. And that survey did specifically address preservation and the community's interest in preservation. So as I mentioned, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the only way to protect a historic district is through a local overlay. Up here, we put the Code of Virginia citation, so you're welcome to just type in 15.2-2306 in Google search, and you can see the language. This little call-out box, hard to read, but that is the extent of the guidance that the Code of Virginia gives. By convention, these districts are regulated through a zoning ordinance, and they are typically, the purpose statement for them is to protect historic resources and manage change. And this is sort of our guiding set of principles overall whenever we're working on historic district design guidelines in Virginia. So when implementing a historic district overlay, I think it's important to understand the roles. In the town of Cape Charles, we have staff role, we have a historic district review board role, and we have town council roles. And there are three distinct sort of tasks. The staff is supposed to be available to applicants to provide guidance, information, answer questions about how to prepare an application, to conduct administrative review. And that's an important one because you'll see when we start talking about the new guidelines, we have moved many actions into the world of administrative review. The reason we've done that is because it can enable staff to process applications more quickly. It can reduce the amount of work that an applicant has to do and the amount of waiting time. And we focused the administrative review items on things that can be clearly defined and are not discretionary items. That also frees up time for the Historic District Review Board to really focus on those more complicated applications. So Katie's role, or the town staff role, is going to change as a result of these guidelines being adopted, if they're adopted the way we've designed them, because she will have a greater workload in terms of dealing with applicants and probably a reduced workload in terms of writing staff reports to the Historic District Review Board. And I know that there's been some tension in the past, so I want folks to really focus on roles, because if these guidelines get adopted, people's jobs and the way that they manage their jobs will change. And that's intentional to improve the process. Katie also, town staff, has the job of providing staff support to the Historic District Review Board. She's the one who reviews the more complicated applications and puts together a staff report. She manages the meetings and the minutes and fields questions from the board and that sort of thing. And always, always, always treats each applicant with respect while rendering administrative decisions that are in keeping with the guidelines. If a proposal comes forth that should be an administrative item and it's not in keeping with the guidelines, she will direct that to the agenda of the Historic District Review Board. So that's the staff role. The role of the Historic District Review Board includes reviewing more major alterations, additions, demolition, and new construction within the Historic District overlay, being consistent in that review wherever possible, and following the design guidelines and implementing them in a consistent way so that an applicant can have reasonable expectations that if they follow the guidelines or if they have a compelling reason why that's not appropriate in their case, that they can anticipate the Historic District Review Board will find in their favor. And like Katie, has to treat each applicant with respect while rendering those decisions. Last but certainly not least, the role of town council. This graphic may be a little bit difficult for some in the back to see, but it is a graphic showing how many applications are received by the Historic District Review Board. That's in blue at the back. How many are approved is the yellow. And then how many are appealed, that's the orange. And this is for years 2018 through 2021. The town council's role is to deal with those appeals. That should be all that they do. Also, appoint members to the Historic District Review Board. So from a process standpoint, if a member of the Historic District Review Board is not doing their job, the remedy is that the town council appoints a new board member. And they only intervene in applications when there is a formal appeal written. Does that all make sense? I think it's important because I know that one of the things we heard in our stakeholder engagement was that some members of this community felt like their roles were being encroached upon in one direction or the other. And if we're going to make this sea change, then everyone's got to be ready to adjust those rules. The other thing that town council can do is allocate funding in support of the Historic District overlay. If a new board member needs training, that's a budget item. Town council adopts the town budget. So if there's a need to update the guidelines, that's a budget item. Town council has to make that decision. So keep in mind, any of that financial support also is likely to run through town council. Cape Charles has done a great job of seeking grant funding to help support some of these efforts as well, and that's, kudos to you all for doing that. But just keep in mind, there's a necessary training and kind of upkeep of this historic district in order to make sure the policies and programs are working for you all. So, is everyone good with that so far? Any questions? Okay. So I want to move now to a little bit of a discussion about the project to date. And you'll see we've highlighted points where we've received input from within the community, within the town, within the stakeholder group. So the first thing we did was we conducted internal stakeholder interviews. We did that so that we could really understand as outsiders, how is this board and how are the design guidelines functioning at the beginning of the project? What are the hot button issues? What are the things that seem to be working well? What is your process like? What's broken? From the perspective of the folks who are actually administering the design guidelines. If we don't have that information up front, then all of the stakeholder input we get from the community has no context. So that's why we start with the internal stakeholders. It's not, we're not intending to be exclusive or leave the community out. We just have to get our feet under us. Once we had those interviews and kind of understood what we thought the hot button issues were, we began to develop a project outline. So we looked at the zoning ordinance, and we worked with those internal stakeholders to identify folks in the community that we needed to talk to. Who were the players in the community? Who are the property owners? Who are the contractors who are doing work? Who are the applicants? Both the ones who seem satisfied and those who seem dissatisfied. We identified those stakeholders as well, and we conducted some stakeholder engagement through a public survey, through a public meeting, etc. So when we had those draft documents together, we turned them over to the town, and our point of contact is Katie, and so we turn everything over to Katie, and she works with the folks who need to provide input, and then she provides that back to us. I can tell you it's not distilled. It is, I can see different syntax, I can see different terminology, I can see different attitudes. So she's really feeding it back to us in its original state. But it's nice to have one point of contact. So we received all that feedback from the town. And then, based on that, we prepared a presentation. And that feedback, for example, told us there was a lot of confusion about what is a state national register district versus a local district. There was confusion about some of the terminology in the guidelines. People didn't understand what the current guidelines were trying to say. So we used that feedback to prepare for, at the time, a virtual public kickoff meeting. Virtual because of COVID, unfortunately. And that's where we really put forth our project design, our preliminary schedule, and kind of how we were going to approach this, what you guys could expect. And at the same time, we launched a public opinion survey online, and I think it had that on the town website. There were many different avenues that you could enter to participate in that survey. We got that feedback, and we prepared draft 1. Draft 1 was a Word document only. It's important, if you've looked at the guidelines, they're very graphically heavy. That's a big part of our work effort, is the graphics. And if we lay those into the document and then we're told the organization is all wrong and needs to start from scratch, then we have to start all the graphics from scratch. So we delivered a Word document. And it's a good thing we did, because we completely reorganized the table of contents. We started from scratch on how this document was organized. And that's good. That's what we needed to do, because we want a document that's going to serve you well. So we did deliver a little preview of what the graphics would look like. We had the cover page, and we had some, I think, the table of contents and some things so you could begin to see what it would look like, but we hadn't laid it all in. We did get some feedback from folks in the community that it was difficult to understand the guidelines without the graphics, and we accept that. But we also needed the latitude to make these major substantive changes based on our comments that we received on draft 1. And so we were able to do that. So we have now delivered draft 2, which is the wholly reconstituted table of contents, completely reorganized content. We actually think it works really well. We've never delivered a set of design guidelines that are organized in this way, but we think it's super. We actually think it's really an improvement. And so thank you for giving us that feedback and helping us come to that place. So right now, we're entering our public comment period. I probably should have moved on and talked a little bit about the stakeholder groups. The way we developed the guidelines was really based on the feedback we received. And it was very consistent amongst all the groups. The internal stakeholders, the property owners, other folks in the community all want to maintain the look and feel of the historic district, wanted a streamlined application process, were desperate for clarity in the guidelines, in the roles and responsibilities, and particularly in the guidelines around new construction. And lastly, there was a resounding desire for a document that was easier to navigate. I'm a property owner, I'm starting a project, I open this big book, how do I get where I need to go to know what I need to do? So it was really great to get that feedback from all different sectors and have those 4 ideas really align. So we had several key takeaways. We know now from that stakeholder engagement that the community values the aesthetics and is committed to the character of the historic district overlay. We know that the process is an important component of this project. Clarity, consistency, and education are also important components to the new design guidelines. And we know that we've got to address the issue of managing change because Cape Charles as a community is changing rapidly. There are a lot of new faces in town, and managing change is an important and critical part of this document. So, with all of that said, this is what we hope we achieved with this draft. This draft is not a final. We have thick skin. You guys have had us reconstitute the entire thing once. Hopefully we won't do that again. But we do want your positive and negative comments, unvarnished. And we hope that what you'll find when you look at that document is that we responded to that stakeholder engagement effectively, that we adequately incorporated and provided clarity to the guiding philosophy that we were given at the beginning of the project as the philosophy that the town had adopted. That these guidelines will result in retaining the historic character that you all value so much, and that you find that there's educational content that helps you better understand your house, your property, and your community, as well as the process. We used those goals to make this framework. And in a minute, I'm going to turn the PowerPoint over to Katie. She's going to walk you through the chapters. And you'll see in the corner of the slides, we've tried to identify which pieces of the pie are addressed in each of the slides she's walking you through, each of the components of the guidelines. So, defensible decision-making, managing change, supporting all user groups, clarity and education. If something didn't fall into one of those categories, it's not in the guidelines. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Katie, who wrote this.
Okay, just make sure I know which way this goes. All right, hello everybody. Can you hear me okay? I tend to talk quietly. Everybody good? Okay. So we wanted to start our content preview with the table of contents. So the numbers got cut off on the side, but we know that the actual table of contents is very difficult to read at this scale on the screen. So that's sort of a summary of all of the chapters outlined in the guidelines. So as Paige mentioned, we completely reorganized this document. Typically when we write guidelines, we have a chapter on contributing resources, historic resources, and then a separate chapter on non-contributing resources, so non-historic resources. But we found in the feedback from Draft 1 that just really wasn't kind of addressing the goals of the town in terms of having clarity in the guidelines. So we changed that. So you'll see the different colored chapter headers sort of tell you what the chapters are geared towards. So the first two are sort of process introduction chapters that kind of get you grounded in what the document is. Chapter 3, which is the orange chapter, is the description of the historic resources. So that's a place where you can go as sort of a reference guide when you're trying to determine what style of building you have and what historic features are important to preserve. The routine maintenance and repairs chapter, that we typically integrate within those contributing and non-contributing chapters, but in this case we pulled that out because a lot of these items tend to fall under administrative review, as well as routine maintenance, which doesn't require review anyway. So that was something we wanted to pull out as sort of almost an educational piece, but also a place where you can go and find administrative review items kind of all in one place. And then the final light blue chapters, those are where we outline building treatment. So instead of doing historic and non-historic treatment chapters, we did a primary building treatment chapter, and within that chapter, there are sections for historic buildings, non-historic buildings, and then new construction. So that's, the primary building on a lot. And then the chapter 6 is for accessory structures. We know that during the 2018 resurvey of the historic district, some secondary resources such as garages and outbuildings became contributing. So that's kind of changed how you deal with those at the review level, as well as sort of the kind of desire to have accessory dwelling units within towns. So that seemed like an important thing to pull out, just kind of really to make that more clear. We were having a hard time, even when we were organizing the initial draft, differentiating between primary and secondary resources for contributing buildings. So that's how we dealt with that. We also talk about, we have a whole chapter on relocation and demolition, site features, alternative materials, and flood mitigation. And so I'll get into it so we can see some examples. So this is from the introduction chapter. So this is a new map that Jess made of the historic district. I know that was one of the comments we had, was that a lot of people, the old map was difficult to read. It was kind of looked like it had been photocopied a few times. It wasn't in color. And this is, the resources on this map are color-coded between contributing and non-contributing resources. And it has the boundaries of the district clearly outlined. Yes? Jess, you want to take that one?
Printed in book form, it should read as a spread, so you will see it across from one page to the next. I think
Yeah.
it's just like
Yeah, I think the version that was posted was the single-page format, but when it's printed in a book, it'll be a full, they'll be next to each other, yeah. Yeah, thank you. So that was something we wanted to update, yes?
So I can wait till the end if you rather.
No, I don't mind.
I didn't see anything early on why the map changed from previously. It looked like, did you see kind of on the north side of town?
So we didn't end up updating the boundary for the district. They had us look at it, and it just, I think it just didn't really sound like that was something that people were interested in have happening.
You say 1964 prior, sounds like, because
So the resources were updated based on the 2018 survey in terms of the color coding between contributing and non-contributing, but the boundaries of the district did not change from the last.
so this is basically 1964 prior.
Well, I beg to differ, because there was a portion on the south side of Mason, right, that was included in one of the maps.
When the
Okay.
prior map, the entire historic district area was in that.
So this is the overlay. There's a difference, as Paige noted, there's a difference between state and national historic district and the overlay district.
They've always had different boundaries.
So
And
what-
this has
what are we
always been
looking
the
at here?
overlay district boundary.
This is everything that the guidelines will pertain to. Everything outside of it does not pertain to the guidelines.
So this is based on our 2001 application? for the-
This is based on the historic district overlay boundary.
That we applied for originally.
Town council adopted a boundary along with the zoning ordinance text that they adopted to establish a local historic overlay district. This boundary is consistent with what that has always been. You all have seen maps that show a larger area that are the state and national registered district boundary. Those maps are non-regulatory, they are the recognition type of district. We took the state and national registered district boundary out, and we walked the entire perimeter of the district with this boundary. And
So are you saying that outside of that boundary does not need to adhere to these guidelines?
Yes.
For example, North Washington is colored in.
And parts of Jefferson?
Right.
So those guys don't even have to come to you?
So with that said, it doesn't mean that can't be a comment from the community at large. If you think this map should reflect an expansion of those bounds, you can submit that through this process at this point in time.
Well, we have been ruling on properties.
Right, and sorry. I'll come to you. In 1 second. So just so everybody's aware of this, I freely admit our map tracking and maintenance has been inadequate in the Planning and Zoning Department. We have struggled to figure out what are the current zoning maps, what are the current overlay district maps, not just in historic, but for harbor, for Chesapeake Bay Act implementation, especially where the RPA is, if there are IDA or what are called intensely developed areas in the Chesapeake Bay Act. We have had some challenges with that over the years, and we have been, this past year, working diligently to research, confirm by vote, what are the actual bounds of the maps. And so from this end, yes, the historic overlay has been a problematic one because in the past, there's been a free use of the National Register map, the state map, and then some of the overlay maps. So we're trying to get to some clarity. It doesn't mean they can't be expanded or corrected at this point in time. That's part of this process, is we're trying to make sure what's been legally voted upon, and then now that we have that defined, do we want to alter it in any way, shape, or form? And this would be the perfect time over the next month to month and a half, should we want to do that as part of what would be this zoning ordinance correction, amendment, and adoption process.
And I'll just add quickly, one of the deliverables that we have been requested to give is that this map is in GIS. And so it is an accurate reflection of where we are and what is in the boundary and what is outside of the boundary. And so that will be made available for future use as well.
So I'm a little bit confused here, and, so from my understanding, there was a state and national registry area, which looks like this,
Not the legal.
but our overlay actually,
That's the legal one.
Andy,
Yes, sorry.
I'm talking.
I hear you.
Our overlay was the whole historic district, which included. So what you're saying is that was wrong? We've been voting on stuff and we've been sending stuff to Historic District Review Board it really shouldn't have been?
That's correct. We were relying upon the map that came as part of the registration nomination that went to the state and to the federal designations. It wasn't actually the map that the town has to adopt as an overlay district. And so they were getting used interchangeably.
Correct.
And so now we want to get it correct. If we want to have those expanded boundaries, we can do that process. But we had to get to what was the actual map. And so through their efforts and work, that's where we are today, identifying this is exactly what's been voted upon to create the overlay district.
It's the legal map.
Can I make a comment?
Yes. And then there's a couple behind you, yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
The expanded map,
And I'm gonna be just a little pushy, I'm gonna push up front so everybody can hear your comments.
the expanded map that you had that included the Harbor District and so many others was voted on by the town council. Yes, it was, because I was on council. I was on the original team that came up with the first ordinance, and it was voted on, believe me. If you can't find it, I don't know. But my concern about you not including that whole thing is if they decide, like we've had several contractors in the past 25 years that we've been here, that wanted to build condos and everything else over in the Harbor District, and now that the railroad is gone, that could be a pretty good opportunity. So do you want something over there that detracts from what is here, especially with the income we now have from tourists and all the people that have moved here? I mean, the 25 years that we ran the bed and breakfast, we had over 750 people move to the shore that stayed with us, and they fell in love with the town. If you dilute that by not including all that district, that is what has happened, because somehow it got confused that it wasn't under the ordinance and it was under the ordinance. So, for what it's worth.
I think we have a good case for expanding it, it's something we should look into.
And we welcome all your comments and thoughts, especially the history. If you think it was, give us a time frame, and I would be happy to do the records research to help confirm or see if we've made an error of what this map should look like.
Bruce, we do have a harbor district that's very similar to the historic district.
But we included it in the requirements for the historic regulations.
I don't recall that. That's something they gotta look up.
On the initial team that took trips to figure out what we wanted to,
Go ahead. Come on forward, once.
Oh, I'll be fine out here, but anyway,
You got,
that's fine, you want to expand it and all that, but what time frame are we looking at again for that expansion? Does it have to go through the state? Is it something that's done locally? Because now we're talking a whole nother time, and as far as I'm concerned, Pandora's box is open, because this is out there right now. So, this has been seen, and if there's anybody that's on this map outside of that area, it's like, psh, I'm doing whatever I want. If I got this map today and I had a home out there, I'm just saying. So, what's the time frame to expand it if you are looking to expand the area?
So this is a local zoning overlay. To expand a district, you would have to put a zoning text amendment in front of the planning commission with a revised map. That map could align with the state and national register boundaries. That is a logical approach that many communities use. Okay? That would involve an expanded map. It would go through like any zoning action. So remain local, doesn't go to state or national register, remains local, planning commission, town council, you're done. So, and our map is in GIS now, so we can move those lines and we can use the inventory that was done in service of the state national register nomination to delineate contributing and non-contributing. I think at the time, the map was one of the early exercises, and at the time, I think there was concern that an expansion would be problematic. But
That being it was already part of the map that we originally had.
this map reflects what was originally adopted in the zoning overlay.
So how long ago?
What was the date?
can't hear him say so.
We're having trouble hearing you.
I'm sorry.
So let me throw a few things in. So, as I mentioned, we've had some difficulty verifying what our local maps are, both the zoning map and overlay maps all the way through. I see you, Herb. Hang on. So we actually have another consultant we've been working with, dealing with the comprehensive plan update, and part of their task was to help us verify zoning ordinances and zoning maps, because we want to get to a corrected zoning map, because we know the one that is on our website is woefully outdated. So with that information in place, I do want to comment, because I know there's lots of concern, especially like the harbor and where that is. Actually, there is a section, as referenced by Mr. Evans, in the harbor district, there is a component within that section of the ordinance and that overlay that talks about its affiliation and oversight and overlap with historic district. That's in the harbor overlay ordinance, which is a different chapter than the historic district overlay. I know it's confusing, but that's just how it was done, and that's how we've continued to maintain it. So Commonwealth Preservation, I'm not sure if you really looked at that heavily, because they weren't the ones charged with that particular piece, and it's a stretch of Long Mason that has harbor responsibilities as well as historic district, and being complementary with the Mason Avenue Historic District look and feel. So I do want to make you aware of that. It doesn't mean that the harbor area has been omitted from the historic district. No, it's just captured under a different chapter of our zoning ordinance and is reflected in the map of the harbor overlay map. I know that's confusing, it's a lot of information, but I don't want anybody to think the harbor piece has been overlooked or stripped away. It has not. So in terms of what I see as the difference, and Herb, you're welcome to chime in on this and talk about it, some of the areas that are at the northern part, I think might be some of the discrepancy here that I have seen around the Washington Avenue. And so I'm happy to do further research to see if this map that we have put in here, and again, I'm not going to say it's solid or final. This is a draft document. I'm still going to hang my hat that it's a draft document. We are still confirming all this information to verify, do we have this correct? So any information anybody can share or shed with me, I would much appreciate it, because I've only been working for the community for just over a year, and I have been scrambling to find this information. And I'm a really big advocate of ensuring it's all backed up by actual votes. So I've been going and reading tons and tons of minutes from Planning Commission to the Harbor Review Board, to Historic District, to anywhere I can go, Planning Commission, et cetera. So if I can back it up, I'll do it. If it needs to be amended as part of this process, I'd like to identify it early. And you asked timeline, where we are. We mentioned that all of these comments are going to be in by the end of September. We're going to pass them back over to the Commonwealth Preservation Group. They will then provide all the revisions and what we hope will be the final version that will give back to the community around the beginning of November. And by then, I will have mapped out the calendar. So between November and my goal is by the end of December, we are bringing this to public hearing for a vote. So I'm not wanting to drag this out any further than we have to. So
can we just say that we're just gonna wait for further ahead?
yes, because I'm not changing the information that's out there right now, because right now we have an official zoning map with an overlay identified. If that overlay is wrong, this is the process where you're trying to see if it's wrong and what needs to be corrected by it, and we again take it through a public hearing process to make those corrections. Come up to the
You have
mic
to come
and say, "People
forward.
can't hear us."
People on Facebook can't hear unless you have the microphone.
I wouldn't have sat so far back.
Keep your steps in.
Yeah, I know, wait. You're saying if a mistake has been made on the map, then that will be corrected. But is there room for us to decide that it's not a mistake, but we need to expand it?
Whatever corrections you think should happen, whether it's a mistake or you want to add a different parcel in or take a parcel out, you can submit it through your comments. It will all be considered by the town council, planning commission, historic district review board, and a decision made. Should we incorporate it? Should we change it? What should we do? And that direction will be given to the Commonwealth Preservation Group to make whatever those changes should be into this document. As I said, this is right now just a representation of what they believe from their work to date of what the bounds are of the historic district
At this time.
at this time.
That's correct.
Just because this is out there, as we just heard, that doesn't mean it's been adopted by the town council. The zoning map, including the overlay, must be adopted through a public hearing process by ordinance. So what we have and have out on our website and on our map, that's still in existence today. It may be wrong, but that's what's in existence today. We'd like to confirm it and fix this moving forward as we start going through this public hearing process. Let's fix everything we can fix.
So if you do get people saying, gee, we'd really like to expand it to include all of Washington Avenue and all of Jefferson, would you do that by December? Or would that be after this is approved and then you have to go again through the process?
It'd be all part of this process. It's potentially, I could get all of it done in that same timeframe. Just to make the public aware at large, how do we revise the zoning map? What do you do about that? So we publish it, we put notices, legal notices in the paper, and if I'm impacting individual properties, a certain number of properties, in this case, if you want to pick up all of Washington and all of Jefferson, it's going to hit that threshold. All I have to do is in addition to the legal notices of these public hearings, I have to do a mailing to those individual property owners to inform them, we're going to include you in the overlay district of this and what that's called. And we advise them, these are public hearings, and you please attend if you want to comment, object, whatever you'd like to do. So it is quite doable to get it into this same time frame for adoption by the end of December.
I got it.
So, I mean, I was on the Historic District Review Board, and I was previously on the Historic District Review Board, and this is the map that we use, the overlay. So this has been used in the Historic District Review Board since this was incorporated quite a few years ago. So people could,
It's the overlay district that we have published and said is part of our official zoning map.
but this is not the same as that.
We understand that. That is what our research.
Well, I'm kind of confused, because this is what we've been using, and now this is different.
We've been using an incorporated map. This is what is adopted right now,
This
which he has in his hand, which has been voted on.
That's what was
That is
adopted.
the territory as it sits right now.
It hasn't been voted.
That's been
on.
adopted.
Actually, you know what?
That's
I
what
think
we
you're
use.
wrong, because town council had to vote to adopt those guidelines. So that, what's in that is probably been voted on. Those guidelines is voted on, I'm almost certain.
All right, the design guidelines have been voted on, but that is not a zoning map.
Correct.
And the
Right.
process for a zoning map takes a different path.
Correct.
I just want to,
Yes, we've got to dig into this.
I'm not saying, but I'm just saying that was voted on.
Yeah, the guidelines we adopted, not the zoning map.
Bruce, you got another question?
Two different things. Yeah, I have no.
We're talking about two things here. I could be wrong about this, but the original overlay that was certified by the state and the United States is very similar to this map. The changes that were made that included what was shown in the applicable as far as the historic ordinances is not in this, but they were voted on at one time to include those areas all the way past, the other side of Washington, in the harbor, on the other side of the street. So there's two things. We've got this, if I'm correct, that's the state and national map for the historic district. Anything that was, when they did this, and I think they did this before I ever even moved here, I think it was like in 89 or 99, Virginia Savage, if a lot of you know her, was very involved in this. We had a historic area forever, but there were no guidelines, nothing was enforced, people did what they wanted. And when they changed that by voting on it to add the restrictions for the historic area into the areas abutting it, Harbor, Mason Avenue on the other side, Washington, Jefferson. I think that's the confusing. The town council, if they choose to, has the right to increase it after all the public hearings and everything else. But this is what's on the books, if I'm correct. So, as far as the state is concerned, and the Department of the Interior.
Well, that's two different things.
No, it's not. One, the council can rectify.
I know, but you're saying state registry and national registry, two different registries.
I know they are, but they have the same map, the original historic district.
One more comment, and then
Okay.
I'm going to wrap this
Okay.
component up. Michael.
One sentence, for 10 years, we've been processing applications on Washington and Jefferson as if they were part of the historic district.
Correct. We know that, Mike.
We absolutely understand that. And whether that is right or wrong, because I'm hearing maybe it was done by the council, and I just did not locate it when we researched our town records. So,
You've been operating as if it was the case.
I know that.
Okay.
So, we've heard it, we've identified this as a major concern tonight.
Okay.
And again, if any former official can shed some light as to a time frame I should be looking at in the town records, please let me know.
And we're glad that we have historian through sevens. We need the dates.
Okay. I'm going to just move on. I think we've had enough map talk for tonight. All right, let's do some flow charts. So one thing we heard was, that the application process could be slow or that it was confusing. So what Jess did was she developed 2 flow charts that appear in Chapter 2 that outline the minor actions, which will be staff reviewed, as well as major actions, which will go through the board. So these both kind of walk you through the process from application submission to all of the various kind of outcomes that can happen and what you do if your application is denied, if it's conditionally approved, or if it's approved, for both board review and staff review.
Are we gonna start doing pre-application meetings again?
Well, let her get through presentation first, and then you can ask your comments.
Okay. I know you can't read this. I don't know that you want me to read through it. It's in the draft, so certainly look over that and send us comments if anything needs to be more clear or if you have, any other feedback on those.
So I will comment, as I noted to the team when they first arrived, some of what you've written in Chapter 2 is really not the process.
Okay.
So there's a section in our zoning ordinance today that talks about administrative or minor work. You've indicated as it's currently written here, that does not require review. It does. It absolutely requires review. It may be done administratively and not go to the board, to the Historic District Review Board, but it requires review by the staff, and a certificate of appropriateness is issued on those minor items, such as re-roofing, such as if you're just replacing the same material on your decking or on your steps. Those are minor review items that I would handle at my level. So we need to clean up Chapter 2 to reflect our zoning ordinance and its responsibilities. Martin.
To that point, 213, the dates for the statute section are incorrect.
Okay.
They're listed as 6 months.
Okay.
And there are 2 conflicts that say
Yeah.
either administrative or board. In one section, it says it can be done administratively. In another section,
We need to go through this and clean that up all the way through, so. And then you asked about pre-application meetings. We're still having that conversation, if that needs to be at a board level, if that can be a pre-application process with the staff. If we need to involve a board member, then that would be incorporated to that process for some of the larger projects. So we're still, from a staff perspective, trying to figure out how we want to respond to that.
I think that should work. That's on me.
On the topic of how long an application or an approval remains valid, I believe we incorporated 6 months because there was some concern in our stakeholder engagement about projects stagnating. And so keep in mind, we have a running list of ordinance updates that would need to occur if these guidelines are to be adopted. So if you see something like that, definitely flag it, but indicate to us whether you disagree with the 6 months or whether you're seeing it as an error based on statute, because I believe that's one where we are intentionally reducing the amount of time to make sure projects continue to proceed.
So that was updated in
And
June of 21. So that's not based on the existing, that's based on a future potential.
so that is on our tracking list of that would need to be an ordinance update if we agree to the 6 months. But I specifically remember that because I think town staff reached out to us and asked us what is typical best practice around the state. So there may be some things like that that you guys look at and you say, this is an error, this isn't how it is currently. And that, we definitely need you to flag that. But also let us know if you disagree with what you're reading or if you think it would be a good improvement. Because if it's an improvement, and it just requires an ordinance update, we would then put that on the ordinance update list. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay. Moving on. So this is a typical page from Chapter 3, which is the general description of buildings. So what we do in this chapter is we want to this is the 2 shown up here are 314 and 315.
Excuse me, do you want chapter comments as we go through?
I mean, I think it would be better if we just do maybe questions at this point. It'll be hard for us to track if we're just receiving a bunch of changed comments. I mean, certainly if you feel strongly about it and want to discuss it, then yes, but I think if you want to put it in, all comments should be emailed, yes. Otherwise, we want to make sure they're all incorporated and accounted for. So you can certainly comment and then also email it. So on this page, we just kind of wanted to show how we're doing the treatment of the historic building identification and descriptions. What we really focus on in the primary building chapter and in the two contributing building sections in this design guidelines book is focusing on retention of character-defining features. So we outline all of the different styles of buildings found in Cape Charles and pull out things that are typical of those styles and what would kind of be important to keep to maintain the character of those buildings. And we also provide examples from around town, just so you can kind of see the different iterations of those styles in Cape Charles. Any questions about that? Yes, ma'am.
So you're saying retain the character, so you don't have to actually retain the historical items. You just have to have something that looks like.
We'll get to that. Does that sound okay? All right. So this is Chapter 4. So as we said, administrative review items. We wanted to be really clear about, maintenance and repair in kind items that can be done with administrative approval. So these are all things, these are photos just showing, roofing replacement in kind, mortar repointing, window repairs, column repairs, exterior door refinishing, and then a sill patch on the far side. So, yes.
Siding in kind is not going to be up there as far as the picture. Or is it?
What's that, siding?
Siding in kind, if you're going to replace siding.
Oh, you're asking us to go to a minor,
Yes.
work item under administrative review.
If it's an in-kind replacement.
Right, if it's in kind, so if you have this material and you're about to put the same material back on, yes, that would be done administratively, but if you're looking, if you had wood and you want to go to hardy, that's going to go to the historic district review.
Okay. And that's all outlined in that chapter. There's some educational content, but that's really kind of where we outline those items. So Chapter 5, we wanted to talk specifically, just as an example, we pulled out the section on porches. So for those of you with a document in front of you, these are the 2 pages up on the screen are 516 and 517. So I know there was a lot of comments to us during stakeholder engagement and through the survey, and we kind of get these everywhere about screening in porches or enclosing porches. So we addressed that in the guidelines, and we just kind of wanted to show some examples. You kind of get a sense with the images we use we really kind of try to pick examples that support our text, so it's really clear what we're saying, because not everybody will interpret words in the same way. But if you see a picture, it's a little bit easier to understand. So Jess is really great about finding graphics that do that. So as an example, these are 2 houses with enclosed front porches. One would be considered inappropriate in a historic district, while the other would be appropriate. And our text describes the methods that would be appropriate for screening in a porch or enclosing a porch. And that in that way you would retain the historic columns and not impact the ability to interpret the porch as a porch, versus the example on the left where it really reads as kind of an enclosed room. Any questions about that? You look like you have a question.
The one with the gold star,
Yes,
is that screened?
that is screened, yes. Oh, sorry, Jess. There's the zoomed in version. So very thin, framing, clear screening to, set, mhm. Any questions? Comments? Okay, let's keep going. Chapter 6, this is on accessory structures. So again, a lot of examples of accessory structures found in the district. And then again, this chapter's broken down between accessory structures that are contributing to the significance of the district, those that are non-contributing, and then proposed new accessory structures, how those should be treated. So one thing that we thought was important was to have a diagram that showed kind of locations within a yard where it would be appropriate to place an accessory structure. Obviously, the design guidelines only dictate treatment where these elements will be visible from the public right-of-way. So that's always needs to be taken into account when you look at a diagram like this. And the alley is not considered a public right-of-way. So for example, that center lot, the third house in, maybe you couldn't see where you wanted to put that new accessory structure from the side street or from the front street, so you would have some flexibility there. Is there anything? Yes.
So an alleyway is considered private property?
It is not considered public right-of-way in terms of determining visibility. That didn't, does that make sense? Okay. I am not an attorney. Yes. That was the information we were given from the town, that the alleyways are not being used to determine, as public right-of-ways and to determine visibility.
They're not streets.
They're not streets, yeah.
It's in our zoning ordinance, how we consider alleys in relation to activity in the historic district. So this is not commenting on any alley, whether it is a public one, a private one, town-owned, town-maintained. That's not the function of this chapter at all.
It's just saying if you can see it from the alley, it doesn't count.
That's correct. We don't hold it against you if the alley gives you a view of the shed in the back.
Right. And these are just some graphic examples that sort of show how our text describes how these things should be treated. So you can see the example with the X on it, the accessory structure is taller than the primary building, so that, you know, it needs to be subordinate to the primary structure and actually kind of come across as secondary to that primary structure. And then the two examples on the right are successful examples of modern secondary buildings within the district. Any questions? Okay. Site features chapter, I think we pulled out the fencing information on this one. So this is 8-2 and 8-3. So fencing is on 8-2, if you want to look at that. And I'll go to a blown-up version of the diagram. So we identify appropriate types of fencing. I don't think we added or changed anything. This is all already in the zoning ordinance, and then, yes.
Under administrative review, it says that fencing can be approved administratively. But yet, this section is under board review.
So deviations from the zoning ordinance. So the fencing is outlined in the zoning ordinance, fencing requirements. So deviations from that need to go to the board.
Okay, but none of those pictures are deviations.
Sure. We have pictures in the guidelines that show inappropriate or appropriate. And because of the zoning ordinance, I don't know if, Katie, you might be able to answer this, I don't recall. Is there a fencing section in the overlay district specifically, or is it the underlying zoning? Okay, so that's where the difference comes in. So there's fencing that's appropriate within the underlying zoning that is not necessarily appropriate within the historic overlay district, historic district overlay.
So which is it administrative approval or board approval?
I think it depends.
Because of the type and style of where they're placing it and the materials that they're proposing to use, we have kicked it over for Historic District Review Board, just because historically I saw that as the pattern when I came here, that had been happening. So we continued that during our tenure at this point. We're trying to get to that clarity. Can we get to the point, hopefully through our zoning ordinance, that we can very specifically identify the types of materials, et cetera, that can be approved from a zoning clearance perspective alone and can be done fully administratively. So if somebody then should apply, and it isn't that type of material or style, or height, well, height would still come through zoning and would anything to do with BZA, but in terms of materials, et cetera, if they're deviating from this, then they can go to the board and make a pitch to them to see if they would find that acceptable based upon any other conditions or considerations of development. I hope I
So,
captured it.
no, that was perfect, yeah, and it was, and maybe, and this seems to be one that's kind of a gray area, so maybe we kind of rework how we,
Our word,
okay,
we may
yeah.
use some words to
Yeah.
this area.
Yeah. And again, these are just a couple of examples of fencing. So the white picket fence is obviously appropriate. The chain link fence with the plastic mesh screening is probably not going to be appropriate within the historic district.
Unless you have fuzzy carpet.
And then I think this is our last chapter we're talking through is the alternative materials chapter. This is board review required, and the pages up here are 9.2 and 9.3. So in this, we outline sort of the considerations to think about when you're trying to select an alternative material. One thing we did not do was provide a list of, approvable alternative materials. Our approach is always, there's a new material out every day, so if we have a stagnant list, as soon as we publish it, it's outdated. So what we did instead was we developed a flow chart. So this is to be used by both the property owner and then the board to walk through kind of the decision-making process for either determining if you need to propose an alternative material or if your historic material can be repaired or replaced, and then sort of how do you get to an appropriate alternative material if it is appropriate to replace your historic material. So I will walk through this. The first question that you should ask yourself when you're thinking about replacing a material is, can it be repaired? If it can, then you don't really need to look at alternative materials. You should repair the material you have. And then if it can't be repaired, then what do you ask yourself? So is it character defining to your property, and can that look be replicated with another material? Is it still available? Can you find it anywhere? And then is it reasonable to expect that someone can install it or replicate it in a way that matches the historic? So you just sort of have to, depending on, what you're trying to replace, walk through that. And really, we put within here we put sort of not a high bar, that's not what I wanted to say, but it needs to be clearly demonstrated that you cannot repair your historic material. So that was another thing we wanted to provide an example of. It can be simple. Exterior photos, like you don't need an architect to do this. Go outside, take some photos, mark it up with a marker. In this case, this was a building where there were modern vinyl windows, and then the owner wanted to replace those. And this is sort of the decision-making for what they ended up proposing. So they took... What's that?
They proposed the one on the bottom?
So these are existing conditions photos. So there's an overall of the exterior that's marked up with what they want to do. There's a detail of the exterior, an overall of the interior, and then a detail of the interior. So these are, per window, you would need, 3 photos to illustrate sort of the condition of the window. And then for the proposed, you can do a lot of things. All window manufacturers, you can typically pull product brochures and cut sheets off of their websites, and then Oh, sorry, it was right in front of me. And then most places you can actually check out a physical sample. If the board is interested in seeing what it's going to look like, then you can go and check this out, and then bring it back to your window manufacturer once you've seen the board. Yes.
I have a question on that. There's been some controversy over, and you have the 3 examples in here of how the divider lines are. And the 3rd example is the one where the dividers are between the blacks. In the past, we have not allowed that. But in the guidelines, it doesn't say yay or nay, it just says. this is
I
one
think
option.
it does say yay or nay.
It's vague, it says.
Okay, so if we need to strengthen that, then we can. I thought it was clear, but
What page, Catherine?
I'm looking.
He's talking to the mic, I'm getting comments that they can't hear anybody.
Or repeat the question.
oh yeah, she asked if grills between the glass are appropriate or approvable
I think,
for windows. No, go ahead.
I think you are correct, I don't think I should put an X and a check mark with the ones that are there, that are appropriate, yeah.
I think the actual guidelines text is specific about that, though.
What was it, Kathy?
Okay, yeah, there's just the 3 options, and it describes the pros and cons on that page. It doesn't say this is recommended, this is not. But then it does refer to chapter 3 for style guidelines. Is that where the,
I think the actual, the one that recommends using SDLs is probably in the guidelines text. So not in the caption, but in the actual guidelines. So the numbered guidelines.
Right next to
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll certainly add it in, yeah. Anyways, okay. Any questions about windows, alternative materials, the flow chart? I can go back to the flow chart. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
And it may be here, and I'm just not understanding the flow of it. If someone wanted to replace their porch, their wooden porch with an alternative material, that looked, I know it needs to go to the review board, but is that something that can happen? We get that question a lot as a coastal community.
If it makes it,
Yeah, where is, I'm just trying to.
Floors.
Porches.
yeah, we do allow for, the guidelines do allow for the replacement of horizontal surfaces with alternative materials, and then any other ones beyond that are allowed for would just go through the same decision-making chart. So the purpose of the chart is really for you guys to kind of decide through practice what you're comfortable approving. So it's really a tool for the community to kind of set that parameter for itself. Okay. And then schedule, do you want me to do this page or, okay.
We have been specifically asked to mention to you guys that by practice, we never include a bad example from the community where we're working. So you can beat the streets and you are not going to find any of the bad examples in Cape Charles. Okay? Now, we will accept photographs of bad examples to use in other communities because those are always very difficult to find. You'll also notice that, do we have any exceptions? Or we try very hard to use all local examples in our good examples images.
as much as we could. If there was like a process where somebody was actually doing something, then it might be an outside example.
Right, so if we don't have a picture of a good example from the community, or we cannot identify a picture, we will pull in a photograph from another community. But if you see in the graphics something that you think, oh, I've got a great picture of my neighbor restoring his windows, and send them our way. We'll use them in this set of guidelines and probably again in the future. But we don't want you guys looking for bad examples within your community. So, and I guess with that, we're just going to wrap up and move on to questions. Just again, a reminder, we have been at this for about a year. And you can see in this schedule, this is what we have done so far in terms of outreach, research, draft review, and community engagement and public meetings. And this is where we are now. We're at public meeting number 3. We are in the review period of draft 2. I can tell we're going to get some really great comments. I love where you guys are going with your comments because this is the substantive type of feedback we need. We do our best to capture everything, but I'm sure you realize even just in this conversation this evening, it's a pretty complex document to put together. I know that we've missed things. I know things can be more clear. We are open to that. Please understand we are following direction. So when your comments come in and they are compiled by staff and then they are evaluated by the board, planning commission, and town council, we will then be given direction. I can tell you the process thus far has been very, the town staff has been very careful to make sure every comment is accounted for and reviewed. It might not end up in the final document, but have confidence that they're all being considered, okay? And we will have more opportunities for public comment. There will be another public meeting. There will be a public hearing for town council adoption. So this is not the last you'll see of us. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions.
I did not see any specific guidelines for the showers. I saw that you mentioned showers and that they should not damage the main structure, but nothing about outdoor showers. Yeah, nothing about that.
And I'll repeat that, and I'll repeat what Katie says into the microphone.
So I think the main takeaway is that most of those will be placed in a location where they won't be visible. Most end up in the backyard, but I think there's sort of general guidelines for the placement of kind of new things, and rather than list all of those or have specific guidelines for each of those.
We've had several issues of the historic.
Yeah, that's an assumption, because we've had multiple issues of location.
Where they're at a corner lot.
Okay.
If you're gonna respond, I need you at the mic, because they can't hear us on Facebook and they need to.
So for the Facebook crowd, the question came up that the guidelines do not clearly and specifically address outdoor showers. And Katie with CPG's response was that we treated introduction of new outdoor appurtenances or features with general guidance about location. I would also say there is a section on screening, and we can be intentional about including showers in the list of items that are typically screened. And we can also go back and revisit the location guidance and make sure that that is specific. There are so many appurtenances that we can't think of them all. And we get nervous about putting a finite list in the document because that could be interpreted to imply that things not on the list are not reviewed. And so we try to strike a balance of identifying typical appurtenances, but not limiting that list.
And we certainly were told that outdoor showers were an issue, which is why we specifically mentioned them. But I think there are also things that people might think of in the next 5 to 10 years that I couldn't even imagine right now, that they would want to put in their backyard. So rather than sort of box ourselves in, similarly with materials, we just try not to have like a hard
And
pass.
just to clarify what we're talking about, just so everybody's, we're not saying that we review outdoor showers where it's just the faucet head and having it attached to the exterior wall. What's coming forward to us at this point are enclosures of those things to enclose the shower. And we've had some interesting approaches from a material perspective, how people are doing it. So that's what we're trying to put something in here for some guidance.
But we don't
Yes.
have to worry about charge, it says in here that's administrative function.
With guidance, yes. So that I know under administratively how I should approach it.
Yes, so anything that's reviewed administratively, Katie or whoever's sitting in her seat in the future will look to the guidelines for administrative review items and ensure that the application follows those guidelines in a way that enables administrative approval. If administrative approval is not possible because the proposal deviates from the guidelines that she is allowed to interpret, then it goes to the board.
Okay, that needs to be added in here, okay. I didn't see that.
We'll ensure that that's clear. Yes.
So a couple things on that. So if you are in a corner home or in a home where you have two streets, your front and back are both on a street, which one actually gets reviewed when you come to the board?
Both.
Anything visible from the public right-of-way, as the town defines public right-of-way as a matter of regular zoning.
Which is a
And
street.
those have been the ones that have been problematic.
And then secondly, once this is adopted, this will be what it is. It's not gonna be they can come in with exceptions and go to homes all over the place and take pictures and say, well, this one's got this one's got this, and come in and ask for another exception.
Design guidelines are only as successful as the consistency of their implementation. And so part of the reason that I spent time talking about roles is because this guidelines update, if it's adopted, it's changing the rules of the game. And to your point, the HDRB, town council should be aware, the HDRB is going to be in a position of making different decisions than were made in the past. And so town council is going to have probably a couple of uncomfortable situations where a property owner comes and says, well, you let them do it under different guidelines. So this has to be a community-wide agreement that everyone's going to stay in their lane long enough in terms of following their own role to let folks settle into these new guidelines. And town council is going to have to feel confident enough in these guidelines that they're willing to stand up to that transition, right? Because I'm going to take off my filter for a moment and say my personal opinion is that things got really tense here because different boards were interpreting guidelines differently. And I don't want our guidelines that the whole community has worked hard on to continue that practice. They have to be implemented consistently. Yes.
So doesn't that make it a rule, not a guideline?
So if you read the guidelines, I'll tell you what we attempted to accomplish, and you all are the judges, okay? We attempted to establish standard expectations that could be clearly interpreted by any user, with the understanding that in every case, there is the potential for a special circumstance. In the zoning world, the valve for that is the Board of Zoning Appeals. Okay? There is a zoning ordinance. Everyone is expected to comply with the zoning ordinance. Katie's job is to interpret the zoning ordinance. But there are circumstances where the zoning ordinance doesn't apply neatly to the application at hand. And the role of the Board of Zoning Appeals is to adjudicate those situations. Okay? So if you think about it like that, these design guidelines set the expectations for building treatment within the historic district. They are more strict on the historic resources because the intent and purpose of the district is to protect the historic character. They're more lenient on the non-historic resources to help manage change. Hopefully, the majority of the applications fit nicely within the guidelines, that we've created enough clarity that folks can plan their projects and execute their plans the way they see fit for their property. But there will always be the exception. And so the role of the Historic District Review Board is to try to make consistent decisions about those exceptions. Just the way the Board of Zoning Appeals does. And if you look, honestly, I'm going to take a minute here because I think you guys should be proud of this. I know you felt like there was a lot of tension, but the actual fact of the matter is you don't have a lot of appeals here.
What period does that cover?
2018 to 2019 is the far left orange bar. 2019 to 20 is the middle one, and 2020 to 21 is the right one. And that's based on the records we receive from the town clerk. So even 9 is a little higher than I would want to see, but it's not an unreasonable number. So I just pause at that for a moment. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, and I think I'm right on this. I think the zoning ordinance says that the only thing that can be taken to the town council for them to make a decision on is if the process is incorrect. So you can't go to them and say, they told me I have to have shutters with louvers and I want plain shutters. You can only go there for process. If the Board of Zoning, Historic District Review Board didn't do it in the order, the way they were supposed to.
And that's commonly across the Commonwealth of Virginia, that's considered best practice because the idea is the town council appoints members to the Historic District Review Board because they find them to be competent and qualified people to sit on that board, right? So the theory is the town council should have confidence in the review board and their decision-making ability. But there always needs to be an outlet in case there's a decision that's made in error. And so, but for the town council to be able to maintain that neutrality about interpreting the guidelines, they have to be confident in the guidelines. And so that's a reason that the town council needs to be so involved in this. They're not administering the guidelines on a daily basis, but they have to understand them well and to be confident that they are appropriate and adequately represent the community's goals and wishes, right? So the hope is, again, I go back to roles. The hope is the town council is confident in the guidelines and confident in the board. The board is confident in the guidelines and confident that their role is clear and that they will be supported by town council in their decision making, and that the property owners who are regulated understand the guidelines, support the end goal, and are prepared to put forward applications that follow the guidelines when feasible, and are prepared to take the time to justify why they need a different decision when the guidelines don't match their project, their needs. Does that make sense?
Well, it doesn't really speak to what I said, but.
What you have in your zoning ordinance is best practice, yes. Town council should only be making decisions about appeal based on procedure and process issues.
Not the issue.
Not the substance of the application, unless the review board disregarded something that's clearly stated in the guidelines. That would be a procedure or process error.
Except this is a problem we've had all along, is the word guidelines. So in our last interpretation, I think it's the current one now, we have more standards than this one has, but because it's called guidelines, nothing can be enforced, clearly enforced. And that's going to be the same thing with this one then, I think, too, because of the word guidelines.
Well, so the word, I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV, and I don't try to pretend to be an attorney. But I have been told by many city and town attorneys that when the word standard is utilized, that becomes a mandate and there is no room for discretion. So the HDRB would not have any opportunity to deviate. But when the term guideline is used, the expectation is a guideline is consistently applied in the same way for the same application type across time, regardless of who the board members are, regardless of who the chair is, and regardless of who the council members or staff are. That a guideline should be consistent, but the word guideline and the intent behind guideline is to accommodate for some deviation where it is necessary and justified. And now I'm getting into best practices, which is not my role, and you can just hook me off the stage if you want, but as a board, when the HDRB makes decisions that deviate from the guidelines, they should explicitly state why, for the record. And if you look at our guidelines, we have a very specific way we enumerate the guidelines so that when the board is making the decision, they can say, based on the guideline in Chapter 3, Section 2.5B, we find this application to be appropriate in the historic district. So every decision is tied to a guideline. It makes it defensible. If something gets appealed to council, council can look up that citation and say, yeah, they did. They followed the guidelines. Or if the board says, the guidelines just don't adequately address this request, it wasn't contemplated when CPG wrote them. The board can say, we're using this guideline and this guideline and this guideline to help us come to a conclusion that what is appropriate for the district is X, whatever that decision is. But always that decision-making process needs to be tied back to the guidelines to establish the consistency you're looking for. And so there's a record.
So that goes beyond process.
Well, it's a little bit of training too. I'm definitely outside of my lane though, beyond what you guys asked me to talk about tonight. So
that's why our guidelines have to be very clear. Because, for example, the showers, if it doesn't say that they can't use a specific material, and they do, and the board denies it, they can go back to the council and say, but it doesn't say I can't.
So for example, with the showers, what I'm imagining is that we could be more clear in the screening section. I think we have a section in site features on screening. And we talk about appropriate materials for screening, appropriate location for screening. By screening, I mean not transparent screens, but things that you would put around mechanical equipment, for example.
I just use the shower as an example. There are other areas that are maybe not quite as clear that I could see people questioning and going to the board and saying, well, it didn't say I couldn't.
Well, so developing these guidelines is a careful balance. We will never account for everything in them. And so, again, you all are the judge, and this is your review period to tell us if we hit the mark. Our goal is to be specific enough that we've given the board a place to go for any action that might come, or any request that might come their way, but not so specific that we're implying somehow that anything that's not written is not subject to review. And that's a very fine balance to strike. We might not be there. So definitely just be mindful of that challenge that we have, and let us know if you see areas where we need to improve. Yes, sir.
The public opinion survey, is that publicly available so that we can see what was?
I think you guys put it on the website for a period.
On our website, under the planning and zoning page, there is a tab set up on the left side menu for the updates to the historic district guidelines process. So if you go in there, it's one of the links. You can access that survey.
Any other questions?
I'm historic. Whereas a major rush was performed to remove the railroad successfully. Is this not working?
Come on, you look, I'm for you.
I'm historic. Whereas a major rush was made successfully to remove the railroad, there's some question as to the general appropriateness of considering anything historic anymore. I mean, just to wit, the signs on houses with various years of construction are the Pennsylvania Keystone symbol having to do with the railroad. And if you remove the railroad, what is the historical basis? And furthermore, most of the comments I get are related to inappropriateness and intrusiveness of the historic process. I ask, is this supported more by the exuberance of the participants in controlling what people do, or is there some nefarious fee that's involved with the permission begging process?
I can answer the first question. I'll have to ponder the second one. So if you go to the Virginia Department of Historic Resources website, they have a link on the left side of the page that connects you to all the National Register nominations that have been done in Virginia, including the one for Cape Charles. And if you look at that, the community is recognized for its significant collection and varied collection of historic architecture, for community planning, for transportation, and I'm probably missing a few because I didn't honestly reread the National Register nomination today. I was more focused on our guidelines to make sure I was prepared to talk about those. But the entirety of the nomination is available on their website, and it's got an excellent narrative. It's got an inventory of all of the historic resources that are within the boundary of that district. It talks about the architectural styles. It's really a wonderful document to learn about all of the reasons that Cape Charles is important, the railroad being one of them, but not the only one. And then in terms of the purpose and intent behind the local historic district, all I can tell you is what we read when we were reviewing all of the historical records of its adoption and the decision to become a certified local government, and the community engagement work that has occurred over time, where I think Christopher Newport University did a study surveying folks to see, what's important about Cape Charles, and everyone said the architectural character and the, historic charm. We got a lot of that in our survey that we did. I think that was the original intent. The purpose of adopting the district is, again, to protect the charm. You walk down the street in this community, and you could be walking down the street in 1965 or 1925. It's so intact, and that's really rare, particularly beachfront communities, which you all are. So my understanding, though I was not here at the time it was adopted, is that it was adopted to protect that character. And I can say, from what I've read, that acknowledgement of how important the character is has been reconfirmed and reconfirmed through public engagement over the years. So.
I think that covers it. I will add in, yes, there are fees associated with the application process. That helps to it doesn't fully, but it helps to cover the administrative cost to deal with this process. As you can see, I don't even remember what it said. We had 30-plus applications last year alone. It's increasing. This year has been no different. We are still extremely busy. Everybody could see the activity going on in the historic district. So those fees help offset the cost of the personnel and the cost we bear to administer this district and all of its requirements. I will comment, I heard this loud and clear when I came on in my first week working for the community. It takes too long. Everything has to go to the Historic District Review Board. There's got to be a better way. So I think we actually really responded to that comment and criticism to try and see where can we move things to an administrative process? Where can it be done in-house by the staff? If you hit all these criteria, you do these things per the guidelines, I can say yes to it right in the office, instead of having to wait the month or month and a half to get before the Historic District Review Board. And it's not a question that we don't want you before the board. We've had to limit it because I think, again, my first 3 months working here, I kept the board here 4 hours one night. We had, 22 applications that evening. They did not like me at all. So I appreciate the town still keeping me on and employed. They should have fired me after I kept them here that long, but we were so backlogged. So we have had to manage things, so the timing, and we've heard that from contractors, we've heard it from their residents. Why does it take so long? Why does it take a month to get onto the calendar? Part of it is we're trying to ensure that we don't overload the board in any one particular meeting. But now through this process, we've been trying to figure out, okay, of these processes, what can be done at an administrative level and not require going to the Historic District Review Board. So I think we're trying to be extremely responsive. Where can we lessen the load and make things a little easier for the customer at large to get through the process?
I think also we need to recognize the increase in the amount of construction and renovation over the past several years that has added to the burden and the length of wait time. I mean, if you look at the applications from 2018 to 2020, it's doubled. So.
And that's just historic.
Right.
And we're deeply appreciative of the investment in this community. Absolutely. It's just we were slightly underprepared from a staffing perspective to handle it in a reasonable fashion. And that's valid criticism from the public at large. Why is it taking so long to get through the process? So we really focus on how can we correct some of that in this revision. Yes. Bruce. Again, can you go up just again so public can hear?
I didn't know they were still on.
Oh, yes.
I can talk loud enough.
Hey, Bruce, there's a camera, wave.
That what?
There's a camera back there in the corner, wave.
Well, if you're wondering why I asked you here tonight, no. Is there a way, I know at one time it was very difficult that people moving into town that had no idea that there was historic preservation here would immediately go into something and start tearing it apart because it was rotten or because it was ugly, because it wasn't painted for whatever the reason. Is there some way that we could get, and I don't know if this would be legal, when you buy something here or when you buy a house anywhere, there's a full disclosure that's supposed to be there. Nobody ever tells them that there's a historic area and that they have to, if it's in the historic district, they have to, have to comply with those rules. And that doesn't happen.
It's in the real estate contract.
Well, it wasn't at one time. Is it printed in there now, or do they have to write it in? Amen. That was my next question. The other thing, I understand that the Historic Review Board is a certified local government. What does that mean?
So, the town of Cape Charles is actually a certified local government. That's a program that was established by the National Park Service in the 80s, I want to say. And it was designed to create a partnership between the Federal Historic Preservation Program, which runs the National Register of Historic Places and things like that, The state Historic Preservation Office, in Virginia, that's called the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and then local governments that have sound local preservation policy. Sound local preservation policy means they're investing in training for their board, they have design guidelines that reflect best practices, tailored to the community, but nevertheless reflect best practices. That there are certain elements of the local historic overlay district ordinance, such as there's a way to appeal, that the board meets certain credentials, that they have ongoing survey and work on National Register nominations. There are a variety of benchmarks, but and each state kind of defines their expectations a little bit differently. But effectively, it's a partnership between the local government, the state government, and the federal government to say, hey, we acknowledge you guys have a good, well-functioning preservation program in your community.
What kind of legal authority does it give the Historic Review Board?
None. But what it does do is it gives the town access to grants, competitive grants, that are only available to certified local governments. And it gives the town access to technical assistance. The survey in 2017, 2018 was funded through a certified local government grant, for example. And also there was some training funded through a certified local government grant. If you all have attended a lot of these meetings, you probably met Aubrey Van Lintern. She works for the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and she is the certified local government coordinator for the state. She would not have come here to work with you guys if you were not a certified local government. So there are some very tangible benefits. But I always try and tell folks who are property owners who aren't involved in the administration of this program, there's also a benefit to the property owner. And that is you can rest assured that the state is evaluating the program here locally on every 3 years basis. And that whether you agree or disagree with how things are running, that there is some oversight by professionals at the state and the federal level to say, yes, they're continuing to function in a way that is appropriate. And when they get off track, there are folks there who can assist in resolving those issues. That was a long answer, sorry.
And it's my understanding that these design guidelines, when finalized, will go to our DHR representative for certified local government for her
Yes.
comments.
Yes, yeah. So as part of that partnership, anytime you change your design guidelines, they review them and say, we think these still meet professional standards. And so as we've developed them, we've had conversations about, do we think that this is going to be something that DHR supports? We've gotten a little further afield on that in some conversations and then kind of come back. So that has been an element of the decision-making process throughout development of the guidelines.
Oh, yes, she is.
In relation to the first part of your comment about disseminating the information out there, it's always been a problem, but I think we're getting better at it. There have been many ideas proposed. I know that they're looking at the information goes out in the utility bills. The information goes out sometimes via Nixle. The information, there is the addendum to the real estate contract if they choose to read it. There are brochures all around. I mean, it's still going to be an issue, and we still have to work on getting the info out there. But it's being worked on, and it's getting better.
Can I comment? I'm gonna comment before you close this, before you wrap this up. Just to clarify, this is draft 2. So the map that you've seen earlier has not been adopted by anybody yet. I'm clarifying that, so don't go to the Historic District Review Board and say, I got it, I got it, I got it. You don't. They still got it. Just throwing it out there.
Thank you.
It's okay, Katie.
This guidelines has not been adopted yet.
No, that's the adopted map they came up with.
I understand that, but there's actually,
It's not adopted, it's not adopted.
Matt, Andy,
That overlay
I just say
map.
that there may be something that they may have missed. This is what they find.
That's why it's a draft.
This is not law yet. But there is,
There were comments, issues, and concerns.
Yes. So, two things which I didn't state at the very beginning. We actually had some hard copies available in the back. I don't know if we have any still left, but if we do, you're welcome to them. There will be one placed down in the library tomorrow as well that can be viewed down there. We have two available in the town hall for the public to come view, and if you want to take the time, you can print it. It is available on the town website. Granted, yes, it is available so that for most people, they can't print book size printing from their home computer, so we did it as an 8.5 by 11 print job for you. If you want to print this at home, it is 222 pages if you do that. So that's why we wanted to give some public copies available out in the world. So with that said, comments, you can deliver them to my office in writing.
One last thing,
Oh.
there will be hyperlinks throughout this in the final version, and if you see some areas where there are page numbers missing consistently, that's because we don't drop the page numbers in, like in the table of contents maybe?
Yes.
So for example, in the table of contents, you're gonna see dot, blank. That's because we're not dropping those page numbers in until everyone is happy with the document. So feel free, if you see something like that, to make a comment, but just so you know what to expect.
So you can drop off written comments to the town hall, to my office, planning and zoning. So as you come up the steps, you can go to the right first door. That's where Tracy Outen sits and Ken Buddha sit. You can put it on their desks and they'll get it to me. Or if that door is closed or they're not there, you go to the left into the building office. And if you walk through, there's a tiny little corner office. I sit there. You can drop them in my chair as well. You can email them to us. We have two email addresses that work. You can do planning@capecharles.org. What? Planner, sorry. That's why I have Tracy here. She keeps me on the straight and narrow. Planner@capecharles.org. Or you can send it to my personal email address set up by the town, which is my first initial, last name, knunez@capecharles.org. My cards are in the back, so if you didn't catch that and you couldn't write it all down, take one of my cards, because all that info is on my card. We would like all the comments in by Monday, September 26th, so that I can incorporate them all and put them out into a packet out to our respective boards that will be meeting that Thursday, September 29th. All of those comments will be part of an agenda packet that's going out to the Town Council, Planning Commission, and Historic District, which means all of those comments will be posted on our website, so you will be able to see all of the comments received. Okay, so I just want to make everybody aware how you can trace this as we move forward. Any other questions? I thank you all for coming. This has been a great evening. I appreciate the assistance of Commonwealth Preservation Group and all the work they've done,
Thank you all.
and our staff. Thank you.